Okay, in this lesson, we are going to learn how to multiply fractions. In my opinion, the easiest thing you can do with fractions. All you have to do is multiply the numerators together, then multiply the denominators together. Our last step, as always, would be to reduce or simplify the fraction. If we get an improper fraction, we're going to change it to a mixed number. So first example, we have 1/3 times 1/4. We'd multiply the numerators, get 1 times 1 is 1. Then we would multiply the denominators, do 3 times 4 to get 12. 1/12 is already simplified, so it would be our final answer. We have 2/3 times 5/6, so we do 2 times 5 to get 10, and 3 times 6 to get 18. Now 10 and 18 have a common factor. We can divide both by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. So our final answer would be 5/9. The last example says 1/2 times 4/5. So we do 1 times 4 to get 4, and 2 times 5 to get 10. Again, 4 and 10 have a common factor. They can both be divided by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So our final answer is 2/5. If we look at the next page, we have lots and lots of examples to work with. So we're just going to do the first 3 together. Then I want you to pause the video and practice the next 6, and then you can play the video again and check your answers. So let's look at the first row. We have 3/5 times 4. Now another way to write 4 is 4 over 1, so that it's a fraction, and 4 over 1 is still equal to 4. So we do 3 times 4 is 12, and 5 times 1 is 5. So we get 12/5. That's an improper fraction, so we have to change it to a mixed number. 5 can go into 12 2 whole times, because that makes 10. So if we take away that 10, we get 2 left over out of 5. So 2 and 2/5 would be our final answer. For the next one, we have 3/4 times 5/6. So 3 times 5 is 15, and 4 times 6 is 24. So we have 15 over 24. Now 15 and 24 have a 3 in common, so we can divide both by 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5, and 24 divided by 3 is 8, so our simplified answer is 5/8. And the last example in that row, we have 5/6 times 9/10. So we would do 5 times 9 and get 45, and then we would do 6 times 10 and get 60. Now, 5 can go into both 45 and 60, but actually something higher can go into both. 15 can go into both 45 and 60. So if we divide both by 15, 45 divided by 15 is 3, and 60 divided by 15 is 4. So we would get 3/4 as our final answer. If we had only divided by 5, it would have worked, but we would have also had to divide by 3 to get our final answer of 3/4. So now I want you to pause the video and practice the next 6 on your own. Then play the video and check your answers after you've practiced all of them. Okay, if we look at the second row, we have 2/3 times 6. Remember that we can write a whole number over 1 to make it look like a fraction. So we have 2/3 times 6 over 1. 2 times 6 would give us 12, and 3 times 1 would give us 3. So we have 12 over 3, which is an improper fraction. We need to change it to a mixed number. But when we do that, 3 can go into 12 4 whole times, and there is nothing left over. So 4 is our final answer. If we look at 2/3 times 1/2, we get 2 times 1 is 2, and 3 times 2 is 6. 2 and 6 can both be divided by 2, so we're going to get 1/3 as our final answer. Then we have 3/8 times 1/3. 3 times 1 is 3. 8 times 3 is 24. 3/24, both can be divided by 3. So we're going to get 1/8 as our final answer. Now if we look at that one, 1 was already in the numerator on the right-hand side, and 8 was in the denominator on the left-hand side. But notice that we have a 3 in the numerator and a 3 in the denominator. That means we're eventually going to have 3 over 3, which is 1. So those 3's really kind of cancel each other out, or 3 divided by 3 is 1, and we would end up with 1/8. Let's look at our last row. We have 1/2 times 1/3, and 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 3 is 6, so 1/6 is our final answer. If we look at 7/8 times 1/3, we have 7 times 1 is 7, and 8 times 3 is 24. Now 7 is prime, and it can't go into 24, so 7 over 24 would be our final answer. And then the last example in this row has 4 times 6/7. Remember, we can change any whole number to a fraction by writing it over 1. So we have 4 times 6 is 24, and 1 times 7 is 7. So we have the flip-flop of the one we just had, but this time it's an improper fraction, so we need to change it to a mixed number. 7 can go into 24 3 whole times. That makes 21. So if we take 21 out of that 24, we would have 3 left over 7. So 3 3/7 would be our final answer. Now, if we look at the next set, we have multiplying mixed numbers. To multiply mixed numbers, first, we're going to change each mixed number to an improper fraction. Then we're going to do the same steps we would for multiplying. So it's a little bit different than just multiplying fractions, because we want both of the fractions to look like actual fractions and not mixed numbers. So in the first one, if we have 1/4 times 4 4/5, the 1/4 can stay exactly the way it is. But 4 4/5 we need to change to an improper fraction. Remember, to do that, we multiply the denominator times the whole number. So 5 times 4 is 20. Then we add the numerator, which would give us 24, and we rewrite it over the same denominator. So we would get 1/4 times 24/5. Now we can go ahead and multiply this together. So we get 1 times 24 is 24, and 4 times 5 is 20, which means we're going to get an improper fraction. And 20 can go into 24 one time, which gives us 20, and then we have 4 left over out of 20, so we have 1 4/20. Still not simplified all the way, because 4 can go into both 4 and 20. So the 1 stays. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 20 divided by 4 is 5, so 1 1/5 would be our final answer. Now, if we go to the very beginning, the very first problem that we had, 1/4 times 24 over 5, if you notice, you have a 4 and a 24. Both of those can be simplified by 4. In other words, 4 goes into 4 one time, and 4 goes into 24 6 times. So we would have 1 times 6 and 1 times 5, or 6 over 5. And 6 over 5 would become 1 1/5, just like what we had. So we could reduce the fractions before we multiplied them all the way out, and that is helpful, especially when you have really large numbers like 24 and things like that. So if we look at the second example, we have 2/3 times 2 1/2. So let's do this one like we did the first one. Rewrite our regular fraction. We're going to change our mixed number to an improper fraction. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus the 1 gives us 5, and we would write that over 2. Now, we're going to check both fractions and see if we have anything across from one another that would simplify. We call this cross-simplifying. So we're going to cross-simplify before we multiply. Now, if you look, we have a 2 and a 2, and 2 can go into both of those. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 2 once. So now we just have 1 times 5 for the numerator and 3 times 1 for the denominator. So we have 5/3, which is improper. We're going to change it to a mixed number. 3 can go into 5 one time, and we have 2 thirds left over. So 1 and 2/3 is our final answer. And we already simplified before we multiplied. Let's try that one more time. In our last example, we have 3/8 times 3 1/3. So we're going to leave 3/8 the way it is, and we're going to change 3 1/3 to an improper fraction. So 3 times 3 is 9, plus the 1 makes 10, so 10/3. And if we look at this one, to try to cross simplify, we have 3 in the numerator and 3 in the denominator. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 3 once. If we look at the other side, we have 10 and 8. 2 goes into both of those. 2 goes into 8 4 times, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. So we were able to simplify both sides. Now we're left with 1 times 5 in the numerator, which is 5, and 4 times 1 for the denominator, which is 4. Now it's still an improper fraction, but it's simplified already. 4 can go into 5 one whole time, and there's 1/4 left over. So 1 1/4 would be our final answer. Now, we're going to do the same thing we did with the other page. This time, I'm going to do all 3 of the problems on the left-hand side. So all 3 of these problems right here. Then I want you to pause the video, try all 3 of them on the right-hand side by yourself, and then replay the video so you can check your answers. So first we're going to look at 3 1/2 times 1/3. Remember, we have to change all the mixed numbers to improper fractions. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, so 7/2 times 1/3. Now if I look across 7 and 3, 1 and 2, nothing will reduce. So 7 times 1 is 7, 2 times 3 is 6. It is improper, so we have to change it to a mixed number. 6 goes into 7 one time, and there's 1/6 left over. Okay. If we look at 1 7/8 times 3 1/3, this time we have to change both of the mixed numbers to improper fractions. So 8 times 1 is 8, plus 7 is 15, so we have 15/8 times. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10, so we're going to multiply it by 10/3. Now this time, if I look across from one another, 15 and 3 can both be reduced by 3. 3 goes into 15 5 times, and it goes into 3 one time. If I look on the other side, 10 and 8, they can both be simplified by 2. 8 can be simplified or divided by 2, and we get 4. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So now we have 5 times 5 in the numerator and 4 times 1 in the denominator, so 25/4. Again, it's still an improper fraction, so we have to change it to a mixed number, but it's simplified. 4 can go into 25 6 whole times, because 6 times 4 is 24. And when we take 24 out of 25, we have 1 left over, so 6 1/4 is our final answer. Okay, the last one on the left-hand side, we have 1 1/2 times 2/3. So let's change 1 1/2. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. So we get 3/2 times 2/3. Now if we look across from one another, we have 3 and 3. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 3 once. The other way, we have 2 and 2. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 2 once. So we really are just left with 1 times 1 over 1 times 1, which is just 1. And if we looked at what we had 3/2 times 2/3. 3/2 times 2/3. 3/2 and 2/3 are what we call reciprocals of one another. And anytime you multiply a number by its reciprocal, you're going to get 1. Okay, remember, you're going to pause the video, you're going to practice these last 3 on your own, and then play the video and check your answers. Okay, on the right-hand side, we have 4 1/2 times 2 2/3. So we're going to change 4 1/2. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9. So we're going to have 9 halves times 2 2/3. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So we're going to have 8/3. Now if we check across from one another, 9 and 3 have a 3 in common. So divide by 3, we get 3. Divide by 3, we get 1. 8 and 2 have a 2 in common. If we divide by 2, we get 4. Divide by 2, we get 1. So 3 times 4 is 12, and 1 times 1 is 1, and 12 over 1 is just 12. Looking at that next one, we have 1/2, which can stay the same, times 2 3/8. So we're going to change the 2 3/8. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 3 is 19, so we have 19 over 8. Now if we check across from one another, 1 and 8 don't have anything in common. 1 and 8. And then 19 and 2 don't have anything in common. So we're really just multiplying the way it is. 1 times 19 is 19, and 2 times 8 is 16. It is an improper fraction, so we're going to change it to a mixed number. 16 can go into 19 one time, and we have 3 16ths left over. So 1 3/16 would be our final answer. Then our last example, we have 1 3/4. So 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is 7. So we have 7/4 times. Next one, 5 times 2 is 10, plus 4 is 14. So we have 14 over 5. So let's check across from one another. We have 7 and 5 across from one another. Nothing's common in 7 and 5. Now 14 and 4, 2 can go into both. So if we're going to simplify that, divide by 2, we get 2. Divide by 2, we get 7. So in our numerator, 7 times 7 is going to be 49, and 2 times 5 is going to be 10. Now it's improper, so we're going to change it to a mixed number. 10 can go into 49 4 times, which makes 40. So we have 9/10 left over. So 4 9/10 would be our final answer. And that is the end of this lesson. So you multiplied fractions, you multiplied improper fractions, and you multiplied mixed numbers. So remember, our number one rule is to change everything to make it look like a fraction or improper fraction, and then you would just multiply the numerators and denominators, simplify, or change back to a mixed number. Very nice job. Now practice some on your own.